All right, so the topics that I'm going to be covering in this particular session today is just some basic navigation around the report manager, some commonly used reports from each group. So we've got roster reports, timesheet reports, payroll reports, leave reports, and employee reports in that. Also, just some basics on how to use the export manager as well for your journal export, SAFF exports. And we've got some export templates. So I'll show you how to create those also based on the system. All right, so let's just jump into it here. So I guess the first step with the reporting side of things is you want to make sure that the security role for your employees who need to run reports, they've actually got the ability to see the reports that they need to run. So if you come into the security roles here, we've got the list of security roles there. I'll just drop down the payroll officer here, and as if we scroll down, we will see a section where it has reports. So you just need to enable the can access section for them to actually see the reports tab and the information in there. And then you can turn on and off the different types of report groups that can be seen. So if we different type of report groups that can be seen. One thing just to be careful in here, if you're, say, got a roster officer that you don't want to see pay rates, then you want to make sure this leave reports isn't enabled for them. You might need to get them to use, say, the calendar with the leave calendar to see what leave's been added or taken, and if you need to look at sort of hours, maybe give them viewing access on their leave tab on the employee details screen. So that leave reports, they do have pay rates on that. We do have can edit report settings, so that one's quite useful. That'll allow the employees to be able to save favorite reports and generate their own favorites list. And the can email payslips, it's just missing one word there or two words, and rosters. So if you're needing to email out payslips and the rosters, then you need to tick that. So even if someone is just a officer and they're needing to email out the rosters, tick that can email payslips there on that particular one. Okay, so if we jump into the reports manager now, so on the reports tab, we've got the different types of report groups, so we can quickly jump to those particular groups. I'm just going to go into the favorite reports, so you can generate the favorite reports here, which will give you a list of all your reports down here that you've saved as favorites. You can also use this view tab to get to any of those report groups. So if you just wanted to have a look at all of the payroll summaries, for instance, you can use that view and it'll just jump to that reports group. On that one, when you're looking here, we've got the name column. So we've just got headings for these two groups. And here where you've got a description in line, that's the actual report itself. So we've got the name, which just gives it a basic name of what that report is. And the description gives you a little bit of information about how it's grouped and also what is in that particular report also. So you can select either one of these columns here using the sample button, which I'm going to use for this particular webinar because it will take too long running reports for every single example there. So you can use that sample button and it just brings up a screenshot of what is in that report with just some sample data that we've set up within the system itself. And just click on that sample button again and it moves back to your reports manager. To make any changes, I should mention, sorry, we've got two columns here. We've got a defaults column and a favorites column on this one. So in the defaults column, that's where you set up what reports are going to print when you use the print icon in either the payroll screen, in the roster screen, or if you're using the timesheet approval screen. It will then use whatever that report is depending on the report that you select there. So for the payroll screen, for instance, we've got default reports for our activity summaries, our payroll summaries, and our payslips, as well as the EFT reporting, which is only shown on the final completion page, and also an unpaid report, default report, but that's shown at the end of payroll on the preview screen there. For the roster reports, the defaults that you can be selected there are your typical, if we go roster reports, so on there we can go for your typical what report you want to see when you print it out. So typically people use those XY grid reports that do the layouts from the roster screen. Also, under the payroll reports, you can choose what budget report that you want to use. And sorry, I'll go through these a little bit more when we're going through the common ones. But yeah, you can choose which payroll report you want to show up when you use the roster budgeting screen. And so that there is under these payroll reports budgets. So you normally wouldn't use these particular ones as your favorites because you need to be in payroll and actually have generated that roster budget before you can run that particular type of report. Now, these default reports, they save for each user's login. So if you're logged in and you like a different set of default reports to your colleague, then you'll have different defaults. So it's not saved globally across for everybody. You'll need to set up your own default reports. And that is also the same as the favorite reports. So those favorite reports are saved per user login, and you can quickly get to those using either that view drop down or on the reports tab using your favorite reports up here. The other one, which I just forgot to mention there with the default reports, that's also in the timesheets. There's some roster reports, which are the rostered versus worked hours. So once you've processed your timesheet approval, you can run that roster's reports there. Okay, so running the reports themselves. So you can double click on either of the name or the description, or you can just select the report you want to use and use the open button here, and it brings up the reports options. So depending on the type of report that you're using will depend on the different report options that you have available. Most of the report options will have some form of select location, select department, and select employees. So if we just come into, say, an activity summary here, up the top, we've got different location, department, and surname. In the surname one, you can turn on and off who you want to see in that particular report. Now, unticking all of these ticks can take forever. So using this little select box on the right-hand side, we've got some different filters if you want. More often than not, quick clear all will clear all the ticks, and you might just tick the couple of people that you want to run that particular report for. Now, for the payroll style reports, you will need to load the pay periods that you're wanting to do reporting on. So with the payroll reports, they're based around the pay period, so not a calendar month. So it is, for instance, if you select in this period and we do previous month, when we have the start and end dates here, once I load that particular period, it's going to show all of the payrolls that were processed within that particular month based on the end date of those payrolls. So if those end dates fall into that month, then that's the information that's going to show on that particular report. The only reports out there that do a monthly, calendar monthly report is the Payroll Summary monthly report. That will do a calendar month worth of reporting for your super. And the other one, if you are looking to do some form of monthly reporting, you could use a department costs report using something like the gross hours breakdown report on that, as that will break down per day. So there will be some manual sorts of calculations and working out if you're short a couple of days or there's a couple of days from another period. But you can use that department costing reports to really get into a day-based thing. But that still will run that report for a particular period on there. For, say, the roster reports, if I just come into one of these roster reports for the options, everything below this surname range, so name, format, and this filtering information down there, that saves as defaults for when you make a change here. It's what will do all of the roster reports until you change it again. So if you want to view something different on the name format, you can choose how that's then displayed on those roster reports. You can also show the employee type, whether they're casual, full-time, part-time on there. Some scaling options on how that's going to fit on the grid itself, especially for those XY reports. Usually fit to one page wide works well. You'll get a nice week there in the report. You can have a look at the border options there on how you want to border the fields. And the other useful one here is select some roster options down here. So you can choose to view leave or not view leave on a roster report. The unassigned shifts one can be quite good. So if you've used unassigned shifts as placeholders and you want to see them in a printed roster, just tick that unassigned shifts. And total hours, so that's going to give you a total for the rows and columns on those particular reports. The other one is include out of location shifts. So if you have selected some sort of location filter and there's people whose default location is that filter that you've got, but they're working in another location, that include location shift will just show those people's shifts on that roster report itself. Also, these scaling options here will affect the default roster when you're printing it from the roster screen. So if you're finding that when you use that print button from the roster screen, and it's all squished in the top left-hand corner, come into the report options and tick this fit to one page wide, or however you want to select that scaling options there. All right, and the other one, so they've all have some different filters. One to mention is also this payroll allowances and deductions report. So in here, when you select this for a previous range, or select it for a particular range, it's going to show all of the allowances and deductions that have been generated during that payroll. So you can choose to turn on and off what you want to do. So this can be quite useful if, say, you've done a big year-to-date balance update or adjustments there, or you're just wanting to report on something very specific on those adjustments, allowances or departments, because your payroll summaries will just show it as a before tax allowance or a deduction or an after tax allowance or deduction amount. So in here you can really get down and find out those individual allowances and deductions in here. So again, using this select function, you can clear all of that, and it might be you want to see all of the salary sacrifices that have been done during that period once you've loaded, and you can use that preview button there to be able to preview that roster, that particular report. Now we'll run this report because we'll get into this preview screen. So now it's just showing all of the people and on what days that particular allowances and deduction for the salary sacrifice was run in here. Now when you're on this print preview screen, we've got some filtering to go full page, full width, or just 100 full height. And you can also use this. If there's multiple pages, which you'll see down the bottom, you can just use these left and right markers to get to those. On the print icon screen here, it will use your default printer to be able to print that information out. And we also have a print to file function. So a lot of people do have the print to PDF or in their print options, which will work fine printing it to be a PDF document. However, this print to file option you can use to select a PDF, but you can also use to export it into an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to do further manipulation on some of those reports, you can print those to an Excel spreadsheet. Just select the location where you want to do that. And then click OK. You'll get a little pop-up regarding some preferences on how you want to set up the Excel sheet. I normally just press OK, and that will then open up Excel in the background with all of the data. It doesn't have the calculations in behind it. It's just what the figure was on that report. It also has all of the header information in there. So there will need to be some forms of manipulation, and it might be deleting that header information to be able to maybe turn those into tables and then correlate that information. But it does give you one option to be able to get that reporting information out into Excel to then do some further manipulation of those figures and calculations if you need to. So that's sort of the easiest way to get the information from ClockOn out into an Excel document there. Just on this select pay period information, there's a custom date range one. It often gets overlooked, so you can get in here and choose what date range that you want to be able to do that, and you just need to press load on that. All right, we do have an email function where we can send out reports. This is only available for the roster reports. And so it'll be highlighted up here. So once you select your period here, you can open the email blast and click send, and everyone who has an email address in the system and who is rostered in this particular case, you will send them a copy of their particular roster. If you do use the include all employees, that will send the complete roster to everybody there on that one. And then the other one is the Payslips. And so a lot of you are probably already sending those Payslips out by email, but we do have that email function, and that will send out the Payslips for each employee individually. Now with the Payslips, they are set with an email password that is set up on the employee details screen on that personal tab. So make sure that you update that password before sending out those Payslips and your employees know what they are. They do get encrypted at the time of generating that PDF and sent out. So if that email password is updated, it's not going to fix any of, like if they've forgotten the password, it's not going to allow them with the updated password to get to old Payslips. So you are going to need to resend them that particular Payslip back to them. Or if they've got access to the app, they can re-email themselves their own Payslips from the app. Now, if you do want to just resend a payslip for one person, just make sure you select that person only. Otherwise, it is going to send multiple payslips to people. I've seen that happen where they're wanting to send a whole period just for one person and have forgotten to select that one person, and everyone's gotten all of the periods of payslips emailed out to them. This print icon here will jump straight to the print option. So if you know what's in the report or you don't want to look at a preview, you can get straight to that print option screen there on that particular one. All right, so I'm going to jump into the commonly used reports. This list that I'm going to run through here, we will post when we upload the video to the website for the blog, so I will have this list as well with a little bit of the descriptions for each of the reports that we commonly see around there. So when we get to the top here, we've got a heap of employee reports. This one probably is worth having a look at. We can get information about what rule sets people are assigned to, their contact details, who are the admins, all of that information. But just some ones of note there under that employee reports. If we go to favourites, the qualification expiry is quite useful. If we have a look at that, you can set that for a particular month and then run that report, and you can see whose qualifications are about to expire during the month. And they're set on the employees' roles and qualifications tab on the employee details screen. So it'll only show what qualifications are expiring within that particular month. The other useful one potentially is the employee unavailability. So you can run that for a particular period and it'll show you who is unavailable there as well as a list. Quite often on that roster screen, people do overlook that little icon that shows that they're unavailable on a particular shift. So this is going to help you just to have a quick double check that you haven't rostered anyone on who's marked themselves as being unavailable. Under the general reports in there, we do have a few, the general reports on that with some information about alerts and stuff in relation to the message center, but probably the most commonly used ones there is the license count, so you can have a look. So this will show your licensed use. If someone is, say, duplicated and works at multiple locations, they aren't taking up additional licenses at each location. They're still classed as one employee, provided you've used that duplicate function to push them to be in a new location. But it will give you a current count on the total of licenses that are being used, as opposed to the information down the bottom right-hand corner here, which is what your license is registered for. Also, the other useful one is the requests. And so this is looking at the message center. So rather than being in the message center and trying to find everything, you can quickly look at all of the leave requests that have been sent through and what their status are. So whether they've been actioned or not, and if they were approved or declined. And if you've added any comments to those, that will also have notes on that requests list there under the general reports. We do have audit reports. These are not the prettiest things to read. So if you do have something that you're concerned about within the system itself, and you do want to have a look at those audit reports, please email support@clockon.com.au and we can help sort of, I guess, troubleshoot and find that information. It's more sort of a bit of technical information in there. Maybe once you've had a bit of help with that, if you are going back to a period to see who's made a change to a particular pay rate at a particular time, it will give you that sort of information. But they're not the prettiest reports to see, which is also why when you're doing timesheets, we recommend you add a general note in and initialize that, and that way it will show up on the timesheet reports with the information in there, and it's a bit easier to see who's made those particular changes. All right. Now, under the leave reports, probably the most common ones, and a lot of them are just combinations of what is in each report. For the leave reports, you can choose long service leave to be set up to be accrued in weeks or accrued in hours. So if you're set up with, on the rule sets, that long service leave is set up as hours, you want to make sure that you're using the leave reports that show the long service leave set as hours. So in this case, we'll have long service or LSL in hours. So you want to make sure you run those particular reports in hours. Otherwise, you won't get all of the information there. So the leave entitlements base rate report is quite useful. Just gives you what their current balance is on their card file, and just giving that total information there. The other one, entitlements tracking report. I like to use the opening balance one as well as pro rata, as it gives you both columns and with that calculation. So if we have a look at that, it does show you per payroll period as it runs. And it has also their pay rates there. So if there is a change in someone's pay rate, you'll be able to quite easily see that there has been or what pay period was there the rate increase. And any leave taken, as you can see here, is highlighted in yellow. So it'll give you the opening balance that's set up there, what their annual leave is accrued, or whatever type of leave has accrued each particular pay, and what their running balance is, giving you also the total of where their balance is there. So that's quite a good one to look at the tracking of leave and how that's done. And then we've also got a payment analysis report here as well. Has been a relatively common request. So this looks at the percentage and the cost of leave taken versus the hours worked for any period that's been selected here. So in this case, it's giving your reports when they started to work. So for leave, the pro rata rolls over at the anniversary date of their employment. So this gives you all of the anniversary dates. And then depending on where they've worked for the worked, annual and percentages. I've got a question here. Can you run time in lieu reports separately? No, all leave is grouped together. If you want to get that information out separately, best to print it as a PDF. As an Excel spreadsheet, and you can pull those columns out there on that. Hang on, in saying that, we do have, can I change the payroll IDs? We do have a leave taken or leave details reports here. We can select the types of leave categories that are in the system here. So sorry about that. Yes, there is the ability to run reports specific on specific leave categories. So if we come to the base rate, have a sample here, we can choose what type of leave we're reporting on. And so that's just double click and you will have the select leave categories. So yeah, the leave taken detail reports, you can choose the different types of leave categories on that. Sorry, I jumped to the no answer way too fast. Okay, so payroll reporting is where the bulk of the reporting is within the system on this. And pretty much most of the payroll style reports, so even if I just jump to the activity, it's a combination of lots of information and compact version of it. So either breakdown of all the details or a compact, and some form of roll-up. So whether it's, you know, per location, per department, per employee. So all of sort of the payroll reports will fall in that type of category. So again, in my favorites, I'm just looking at those commonly used ones. So the activity summary with the payslip breakdown compact, if we have a look at that, this will run, it's pretty much after the payroll. It will show you what the actual timesheets section for that period is. It'll also show you their gross wage information and everything else that's in the payslip. So it's a lot stronger broken down version essentially of the payslips because it has those timesheets and it has how those timesheets are being calculated and being paid out and broken down there on that one. The activity summary, again, is a default one, so you can choose which activity summary you like, and at the end of payroll, you can print the activity summary for that period that you've just processed. One that quite oftenly gets overlooked or people just don't know about is the interbilling, like interlocation billing report. So on all the timesheets, you can set up people to work in different departments and different locations. And so if you need to bill another location for work someone's done out of a default location, this particular report is going to show you the hours that someone worked in a different location from their default location. So you can see here, we need to bill Malvern 002, and these particular people all come from Malvern 01. So for the work of that particular period, we'd need to bill this gross dollar amount or however you're needing to bill that information to the different location. So that inner billing report is going to help you bill between multiple businesses that you may have or multiple locations that you may have within ClockOn itself. They do need to be within the one database. So if you do have multiple databases, we can't run that report to bill a different database. Under the department costing, so this is going to be based on how the timesheets are set up. So the department costs will depend on the timesheet where those department information is. So the cost summary here, which is a department roll-up. So this is just the costing for each of the department for all of the employees there under those locations. Another useful one, like I mentioned before, is the gross hours breakdown. So in this gross hours breakdown, we'll give you for a particular period, particular department and location, each employee, the total number of hours that they've worked based on like normal hours or penalties or overtime. So if you're wanting to get a breakdown on those per employee, this is quite a useful one in there. There are a number of gross hour ones on that in there to take note. Some of these grid ones can be quite useful. As you can see, actually that one's probably not the best, as this will give some information around the different departments and costs based on the different types, whether it be annual leave, types of penalty, or the cost there for the different, say, overtime, if you're looking for something like that around what overtime is being used. So those XY grids can get a lot of information on a particular printed report. And then we've also got under the department cost section, the gross hours day summary averages. This particular one can be quite useful if you're using or needing to calculate your long service leave that you need to pay out. You can run that for a period and you can find that average of, you know, more hours over the last 5 years as opposed to the last year. So it gives you a breakdown of their average hours that they work, helping you then potentially calculate that one for long service leave. Okay, so I've just got a question here, which is a good one. So when you process payroll, have someone who works in multiple locations, does their net pay get allocated to default in the bank file? So yes. A person's default file is where they belong, where they work. It's also how you tie them to their location and ABN. So the banking and the wages are going to be paid out for that. And that will also show and reflect in the Payg summaries and the payroll summaries as well. The department costing information there is going to show you more for a reporting side and potentially your journals on where you want to then allocate that cost within your accounting package or see those costs split. But the bank file is set on the default person's location. We can't pay. That's why we have the interbilling report. If you then need to cross bill another location for someone working somewhere else, but the wages get paid out of that default. Which brings me down to the journal summaries here. So we can do manual journal reporting. So this particular manual one will be sort of the roll up for the whole location for that particular period. We also have one here which does also break down location and department. So if you are needing to report those gross earnings, that information into a third-party accounting package, you can set up this one and it will break down in those particular departments. For those journal reporting, it can be quite useful to set up the accounts where that needs to go. So if you go into setup and under locations, just select your location, go to departments, double click on the department itself, and under the accounts is where you can set up your general ledger codes for the particular departments. If you do use MyOb, we do have integration with their cloud version of MyOb, and you'll be able to select, I don't know if it's still active at the moment, you'll be able to connect here, and from that you'll be able to select the drop downs depending on what is already set up within your MyOb account there ready to go. So yeah, if you've got MyOb online, we can do set that up. There is a previous webinar about setting up that integration. That yeah, you can, if you go to our blog and go to the webinars, there you'll be able to see it's the Plan, Check, Report, Act webinar, and right at the end of that, it's got a little bit of information around that. Otherwise, for everyone who might be using a manual one or anything outside of MyOb, you can come in here and make manual changes to what those account codes are. So having that selected is also going to help when you do run these journal reports, because you'll be able to see your job codes, tax codes, and any account numbers there to put the figures, so that'll help you do that. Another thing regarding the journal codes, and this will also come into play when we run our journal exports, is that to close all. So if we go into the system setup, we can choose the journal grouping here, whether it's employee department or work department. And so that's going to group where those journal files are going to be based on their default department, which is employee department, or the timesheet, which is work department. So you want to select those first before you process any payroll. Otherwise, it'll change any future payroll, but isn't going to change any past payrolls on that one. And while we're here, I will mention the I will also mention the cost methods for the super also. So when you're running the super reports, you can cost to the employees default department or cost it to where their timesheets work. So on those super reportings, you can look at there as well. This cost method isn't going to affect your SAFF export. And I've jumped ahead a little bit here and I'll better explain it. So this cost method is not going to affect the SAFF export. However, for the journal grouping, the worked or employed is going to affect which MYOB journal export it's going to use by default if you're running the journal export at the end of payroll or from the payroll tab. So creating the journal file here will be dependent on which MYOB journal export you're going to generate is based on that system setup and how you're grouping those journals. All right, and I will cover that a little bit more in a moment. So that's with the journal exports, and that's just information so you can manually enter that information. We've got the Payg summaries on that, and they're very similar to the payroll summaries here. Payroll summaries gives you the option to select what you're viewing at the end of payroll with the defaults. So if we have a look here, it is going to give you a breakdown on what's essentially been paid and costed, say, similar to that EFT file information. So you will have all of the gross wage, totals, hours, all of that information on the payroll summary. The Payg summary, and in this case I've selected the year-to-date adjustment one. So if you've ever processed a year-to-date adjustment using our allowances and deductions, which is how we recommend doing modifications to year-to-dates, this one will show that information, and any year-to-date adjustment will then also show in red on there. So if you do those adjustments, please enable that year-to-date adjustments compact on that Payg summary. I'll just quickly bring over, I ran before the webinar here, just a couple of the differences you can sort of see between the payroll summary and the Payg summary. So they're very similar with information. So the Payg summary, which I've got selected here, will give you the total information for the location. So it'll break down each of the employee for the totals during that period, but it's going to total up for each location and then give you a grand total for your whole database. Whereas the Payg summary, we've got some information at the end here based on if you've got any allowances and deductions for the reimbursements that's got GST or non-GST information. That's some additional information that's going to show here. But essentially the difference is it will give you in the payroll summary the breakdown per department totals. So you'll see those per department totals on that, and it won't come in and give you a total location information. So the payroll summaries will total everything per department and give you a grand total for everything. The Payg summaries will give you all of the information but total it for each location. So if you're doing reconciling figures and that for particular locations, that Payg summary is the better one to use there. For the payroll summaries, we do have EFT Banking Summary. So this is the same information that's going to be in the ABA file. And I apologise that some of these might be a little bit hard to read depending on how you've got your screen zoomed. Unfortunately, I can't zoom this any bigger, so sorry about that. So this has all of the bank details, account, and just the net wage paid information on that column. So that's the same information that's being generated in the ABA file. This is also something that can be printed at the end of payroll. We briefly touched on the payroll allowances and deductions reports. So these are quite useful to be able to select what allowances and deductions are being used. It also gives you a breakdown of if they're, before tax or after tax or a part of the super information there. So this particular one just has everything one after another for each employee. Quite useful when you're reconciling. You might want to just look specific at each type of allowance on one page at a time. So if you want to see the total costs of someone's, garment allowances here on one page, and the next page you might want to see, the total costs of their travel, you can use this one per page. The payroll summaries, as we talked before, most people will use the compact one at the end of payroll as their default. But if you're going back and needing to find out a little bit more information of each payroll that's been processed, the period detail one is quite useful, as it will break down each employee per payroll that's been processed in there, giving you the total, but also what happened in each particular payroll or pay run. With the payslips, most commonly used ones are the payslip series 2. They look like an old typewriter has typed them up. If we come in here, we do have a series 1 here on these. So there's lots of different types on that. They might, as some people refer to, being a little bit prettier to look at. Quite often, these are the used if you're still printing them out and putting them in an envelope to give to people. You'll have more options about fitting different types of envelopes using the series 1s. The series 2, which I said are the most common ones, you can look at the custom ID, which is set up on the employee's personal tab, just down the bottom. So if you've got an employee number in a different system and you want to show that on the payslip, you can add a custom ID on that one. If not, it does use the internal ID, or you can force the use of the internal ID. So the default when we normally do the implementation will show only the annual leave balances. And then all the others show the annual leave balances and some other form of leave on that payslip. So the combinations we have is annual leave and long service leave, annual leave and their RDO balance, annual leave and their time in lieu balance, or all types of leave. So if you do want to show personal leave, then you need to use the other entitlements, which will show all of the leave entitlements on there, what their balances are on their pay slips. And again, you want the default here, so you can print them out at the end of payroll. Or when you're in payroll itself, you may want to just look at a preview. So there is a print preview icon there on that one. And you need to come to this report manager to email out the pay slips. All right, back to favorites here. Then we've also got some superannuation reports. Like I said before, the monthly summary report is going to show for a specific calendar month. These reports do show the payment type for each person, and it's grouped by what the super fund is for that particular month. The other useful fund summary one is the payment type. If we have a look at this, and it'll give you a breakdown of their employer contribution, any salary sacrifices, and any co-contribution. So this fund summary one is quite useful also. On the roster reports, again, these are the ones that can be emailed out, and quite often people will set the XY grid as the print from the roster screen and then use one of these standard ones to email out because they're more list orientated. If you're needing to have a look at the roster reports, which will show break times, this daily break times is quite a useful one. It also shows the general notes here on that. So if you do use that general notes section, which is also visible in the ClockOn Go app under timesheets, this particular one will put that information on this printout. The break times is also a useful one because it just shows the whole shift in an order. So each person will give you a list of what days they work. So this is broken down per employee on that particular one. The XY grids one here, what might be quite beneficial if you're using the XY grid reports is to go into the locations and go to roles and add short codes for that. Reason being, if I have a sample on here, it will then show the short code after the break section there. So it's going to better show what role that person is on in here. So this XY grid one has all the employees down here and then their particular shifts that they're doing. If you do enable the hours, it will give the person a list of what their total hours are for that particular period. It'll also give you the total hours of people that are rostered for that particular day as well. The one with the roles, this is the most common, I guess, closest relation one to the role view within the rosters. So if you're using that role view, you like that, and you want to print out that particular a roster that looks similar to that role view, this is the particular one to do. Changing short codes, so we go to setup under locations. Sorry, I did skip over this. Select your location, click on the roles, and you'll have a list of those particular roles. And so you just double click on the roles that are there, and you can add the short code here. It's also where you get the pretty colors on those particular roster reports. Also, we can just click on the colors and make changes to those. Those short codes aren't set to any particular length. It's not like you have to use 5 letters or 3 letters to do that, but I wouldn't go too many more than 5 letters, or your roster printing out is going to be take too long, or be too big, sorry. Right. And then on the timesheet reports here, the default timesheet report that you select here, that's used in the timesheet approval screen. So we've got rostered versus worked out. So this timesheet shows all of the actual break times. So it's got the clock times as well as the rostered break times. In the timesheet reports, we have the timesheet, the shift name shows up here as well. So if you have adjusted that shift name, it may not say what the shift is that was rostered in here. It just has those shift names. We do have the start and end times that it's been clocked, and break times it's been rostered, and it also shows what their rostered hours versus what their worked or actual times are on here. The other one here, we've got daily ones, which shows either the general notes or the incident notes. And I just realized I think I forgot another useful one. So we also have these scan time reports, which can be quite useful as well. So I need to remember to add this. So if you're using one of the ClockOn, the scanners in there, or the Go app, once that particular time's been done and scanned, and this sample doesn't have it, any adjustments that have happened on the timesheet that differs from what has been reported as an actual time by the employee will show up in red. So it means that actual time has been adjusted, and it'll give you what the actual one was from the scan. So this one's quite useful to see if there's anyone, or if a manager's been adjusting people's actual start and end times. All right. So yeah, if you want to view all of the incident notes, because they don't show up anywhere, only in these particular reports, this is quite useful. So these are the manager notes that you set on the bottom of those timesheets. And then we have some rostered work paid comparison reports. So these timesheet reports and the roster reports, they can be run before any payrolls have been processed. The rostered worked and paid comparison reports, they need to be run after a pay period. And so in these particular reports, they're going to give you a breakdown of what were the hours rostered, what were the actual times that were clocked, and it gives you sort of a difference between those two. And then it also looks at what was actually paid, so once the roundings have kicked in. So this is going to give you a good idea on the differences between the 3 different sorts of levels that ClockOn looks after, which are those rostered, actual timesheets, and after payroll information. And depending on which time comparison, this particular one's got sort of everything in it. It has the break details here, but also gives you a breakdown of penalties and overtimes on that as well, any sorts of leave also under this paid section. So that one's good to have a look at your costing there. So this list that we've sort of run through as default reports with a brief description, I will put that again on the webinar blog page when that's all ready to go. Okay, so we move out of the reports manager there and over into the export manager. So under the home tab, we do have exports. This integration wizard, that's used for MYOB specific exports for journals and timesheets if you do have MYOB online. However, again, on that previous webinar there as well, you can do a manual timesheet export at the end of timesheet approval. So if you do have the time and attendance only module with us, then you can run that timesheet approval and do an export to a CSV that you can import into your payroll system. Under the export manager here, oops, to jump to the other side, I've already added in a number of templates here. Typically, you will just see these blue ones, and they're the defaults that we send to the system here. So before I get into those defaults, what you're wanting to do is with any of the exports that you've got, you'll need to change the file location before you run that. So say with the SAFF file one, we can select it and use the edit button, and that will open up the export information, and we can choose the file location of where we're wanting to send that particular export. On here, I've just got a temp folder, and that's how you change the different location for where you want to save that. So if you do have a file server in the office, I'd recommend changing it to a shared drive if you've got multiple people that need to access those reports or are going to generate those types of exports, because it does, yeah, there's only one location for that particular export. So if you've got it local on your machine and someone else from a different machine needs to do that, they're going to then have to change that file location. So you just want to double check on that one. For these journal exports, so if we come out and go to payroll, you can create a journal file, which essentially brings up the journal export here to run that particular export. Now, the difference between whether you're going to be using that default export, so whether you're going to be using the default department one or just the roll-up for the particular location export, will be dependent on that system setup file with the journal costings group. So when I said before, you need to choose if you're using employee department or work department, that'll different. So employee department, we'll make sure the default journal export for my ob there uses the default department one. If you select it for if you select it for the work department, it will use this. Sorry. If you select it for the employee department, it will use their default department and will just use this top journal one. So that's how you can choose the default. Unfortunately, from the end of payroll screen and on that payroll tab for that journal export, those my ones are the default. If you are using Xero and you need to do that, then you will need to come into this export manager to do the Xero export here. We also do a Reckon export. So if you've got anyone that's using Reckon or QuickBooks, we can do those types of exports. And essentially what we use to do that is an export template on that. Now, all of these journal exports, they need the account, they need to have the departments and the account and all of the account codes entered in correctly for that type of export for it to work. So if before you import any of our exports, we strongly recommend you back up your third-party accounting package software. So if something does happen, you can then revert back. For the Reckon Journal one, so if we're going to generate that from scratch, and that's the same with any of the templates that we can build, we can click on the Add button here. So I might call it QuickBooks Journal. I can choose my file location for that one. And I'm just going to click Save. And so that's added this in here, but there's no information around that. So with that now selected, we can use the load template. And we've got a list of templates which pulls the various information out of the system. And so depending on how your QuickBooks is set up, we do have, you can export it based around departments or based around locations, or not splitting by departments. So it really depends on how your QuickBooks set up. And if you need help with that, please email support@clockon.com.au and we'll be able to advise on what's the best one to use. So you just select the template itself. We click load and it says, do you sure you want to apply this template? So that'll override anything that's in the background on that existing export. We go yes. And so now this has now applied the information here for that QuickBooks journal on there. The only thing that you will need to change on that QuickBook journal, so if we go to Custom SQL, it's got all of the information that pulls the appropriate info for QuickBooks. The only final thing for a QuickBooks one is you need to just change it to be a interchange format file. And so that's the only final thing with it, with a QuickBooks journal export there on that. For your Superstream export or your SAFF file export, a couple of things you need to check before you run this export. So you need to make sure everything's closed. You come into your setup and into your system setup. And under your super tab here, you need to ensure that every super fund has a USI number in there. Otherwise, that file won't know where that needs to go. If it is a self-managed super fund, you need to make sure you tick that. Add the ABN, service address, and the bank details again, so that file, when you upload it to your clearinghouse, it knows where to send that money. If you've got any queries on that super fund, once you click on this tab, click on the help file, and it'll give you the information about the default fields that need to be filled out for the different types of super funds. So you want to make sure you've got fund name and USI number. That USI number is important, even if you stuff up the fund name on any of the commercial or industry super funds. The USI knows that is where it needs to go to. So that's step one. You need to make sure the super funds are set correctly. On the employee details screen, when you come into the pay tab, you also need to make sure, so you just click edit, you've selected the appropriate fund and given it a fund number. So you need to make sure that that is set so it knows to go into the right places. And also, if you do have any salary sacrifices set up in your allowances and deductions for anybody, let's let this one load. Do I have it in here? No, so we'll just quickly add a salary sacrifice. You need to make sure, again, you select the appropriate super fund and put the member number in there so it also knows where it's going to. So if someone is doing a split between two super funds, which I haven't really seen, but we do have the ability to do that using these allowances and deductions. So you need to make sure those things are set up before you run your SAFF export. And then we can come into the exports. It always jumps to my other screen. We click on and select the export we want to run. Use the export drop-down. Export selected. It will then give us some information about what we want, how we want to filter it. Again, choose the period that you want. So it might be previous period. We can load that. Also, in your fund range, you may want to, well, I'd recommend just unticking the no super fund. So anyone that doesn't have a super fund attached to them, our reporting is going to pick it up that they do have super, and you can keep that ready to go for when you do need to upload super for them. But you don't want to have a no super fund in your SAFF file because the clearinghouse won't know what to do with that information. So just untick that before you run that and you click OK, and that will generate that SAFF file ready to be uploaded for that particular month. You can view the SAFF file in Excel to see what's going on. So I'll just quickly open that one up. C drive, temp. And so it does have the information here that is in that particular file. So you can move across towards the end and you can have a look at the breakdowns of each of the types of contributions and the periods there. So you can run one of your super reports and do a quick reconciliation that you've got the right figures there. Be careful, do not edit this file in Excel and save it, or even save this file in Excel. Microsoft puts weird headers in the file once it's saved, so it will fail when it uploads. If you do need to edit this particular file, you can edit it in Notepad and make adjustments on that. Unless you know how to do that, we don't recommend doing that. If you need help doing that, please again email support@clockon.com.au, and one of the team will be able to assist you. Typically that might be needed to be adjusted because, you know, someone didn't add a super fund for a month, and then the next month you want them to go into that super export, and you'll need to just put a figure in there because it won't be able to allocate it to that particular fund for that period that wasn't sent on that one there. All right, so it looks like I've managed to cover everything in time, which is fantastic, and probably my first time I've done that. So again, thank you very much for that. There is, if you go to the help file under the export manager there, a whole heap of information that can be used in that. We do have a custom builder on their custom SQLs. Look, if you've got someone who's real tech savvy and can build SQL queries and things like that, we're happy to point them in the right direction on that information. But sticking to those templates, we've got a whole heap, so you can look at different role exports and how they come out as well. Any questions, I guess, quickly on that? I've just, Cherie's just put the link there for the feedback, so if you've got time to fill that out, it'd be greatly appreciated. By going to there, there's a little section in there where you can put in what you'd like covered in future topics. So the more information I get on those, the more likely I'm going to do particular topics. I know there's a lot in ClockOn. We can really get deep dive into one particular topic if there's enough people wanting to do that one. If anyone, I've just allowed it to unmute yourself, so if anyone had any questions briefly, feel free to speak up. No, everything looks good. All right, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know we're all busy. Hopefully I've been able to answer your questions on different reports we have and what is there available for you to report on in the system. Again, we will be keep an eye on our social media feeds when we post the blog online. We update those to say it's available and ready to go. It should be up there sort of early next week, I expect. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.